Today on the show, I'm in conversation with Todd Holtsberry from United States of America. Todd is multi-talented. He's a musician, a singer, a songwriter, and a BMX champ. His cycling journey began at a very young age when he started participating in BMX races locally, and then he went on to win the national championship in the BMX races. Up next, he talks about his cycling journey and his love for BMX bikes.
Hello, this is Todd Holtsberry, and thank you for having me on Road Benders. I first discovered BMX at the age of 6 in one of my brother's Boys Life magazines for the Boy Scouts, even though they have since disbanded. It was a big influence by seeing all the ads in there and the tracks that the Boy Scout administration had set up across the country, and they would feature them in Boys Life magazine, and that's actually what pulled me into the sport originally. It inspired me to actually build my first bicycle at the age of 3 rather than even knowing how to ride yet. I still had a small little 12-inch bicycle that I would never ride because it had training wheels on it, and I felt it kind of belittled me back then. So I painted the Schwinn baby blue because it kind of matched one of my dad's Mustangs that he had. He had like a 1965 Mustang convertible, and I wanted to match that. So I bobbed it out. I took the fenders off, the chain guard and the kickstand, and I actually made my own very first BMX bike. And the Stingray is the kind of thing that inspired the sport in the first place. If you were to look up on YouTube, Joe Kidd Stingray, it's very inspirational. I grew up on a small farm of 33 acres in northwest Ohio. And in elementary school, I believe it was the first grade, I found this book about BMX in the library that was about Scott Breithaupt, the SE founder. He's no longer with us, God bless him. But he is the guy that, like in 1970, the year I was born, just in empty parking lots, they set up jumps and turns. And back then, the embankments weren't as much of a berm as they are today. But it wasn't even in my home state of Ohio that I rode my first BMX track. It wasn't until 1980, I was 10 years old, my grandparents had taken me to Denver, Colorado, and we were at a family motorhome convention, and there was a BMX track there in Denver. And that's the first time I ever rode, and I only had just a standard bicycle back then with a banana seat on it. And so I took that home and ripped that seat off and got the little itty bitty BMX seat. And there was my first bike. But luckily enough, my grandfather bought me a Huffy Pro Thunder. And that's when I joined the ABA and actually started racing in sanctioned bodies, not on my own little home tracks that I had on our farm. So back then, I used to ride an MCS Magnum 2000, and Mark was a very big guy. He was at least 6'3" and over 200 pounds when he was training very hard, and no one could touch him. Out of the hole and all around the track, no one ever could touch him. You can see in YouTube videos, you just look up the old NBLs, Nationals, and he is all over it. You can just see him dusting his class every time. So then I also got picked up with my very first sponsor was Levi Strauss, had a BMX team. And so I was on their factory team. And in 1984, I was actually one of the riders of the year. So the very first 3 years in the ABA, I won nearly every local race that I was in, and also into Michigan, Indiana, and throughout Ohio. And so I worked up through the ranks quite quickly. I don't even think I was a beginner for a year when I turned novice. See, the rating system was a lot different. So today's is more of a podium type situation. And back then, the race field was very wide and deep. So you would have like quarters or even eighths or sixteenths in my class, because my class from like 1970 guys who are all 50 now. And you wouldn't believe how many of those guys are continuing to get back into it like I am. after I took a very long absence. But it's great to be back. So right here beside me is the my very first national win, and it was in the ABA. I was 13-year-old expert. I had fell in quite a slump after I'd gone from novice to expert. And a lot of people were doubting me, saying that, yeah, he was a great novice, but he's kind of getting it handed to him in the expert ranks. Well, the NBL was no joke. I had left the ABA. I wanted to be challenged a little bit more. The NBL was a little bit deeper classes, not taking anything away from the ABA because they still are probably the governing body, because of a lot of the USA BMX tracks today are old ABA tracks.